Hello, good evening and welcome to Senghenydd, about 12 miles north of Cardiff, where thousands of people have been coming all day to see the unveiling of the new National Mining Memorial. On this, the centenary of Britain's worst ever mining disaster. On this day in October 1913, at 8:10 in the morning, 439 men lost their lives in two massive explosions in the mine beneath my feet. It would be Britain's worst ever mining disaster. Well, the sculpture behind me tells the story of two miners, one helping the other towards light, towards air, towards rescue and towards hope. The whole community has come together to pay for this memorial and this memorial garden. And in just a few moments, we'll see local school children parade in the memorial garden, their school built on the site of the old colliery works. We'll hear from them in just a few moments. But we begin tonight with Nick Pallet on the unveiling of the new National Mine Memorial, which is in memory of all the men who died here on that day 100 years ago, but also remembers of all those lives of people who lost their lives in pursuit of coal right across Wales.
The Pithead hooter sounds a century on from Britain's worst mining disaster. At 8:10 on October the 14th, 1913, 439 men were killed in an underground explosion at the Universal Colliery.
The death of any miner was and is a tragedy for their family and friends. And so the National Mining Memorial commemorates all those killed over the years that the black gold has been dug out of the land.
Today, on the site of that pit, a new sculpture is unveiled in a ceremony to officially open the Wales National Mining Memorial.
This is important to us as a nation. We needed a national monument, but it mustn't only be on sadness. We must remember what we've achieved as a people, as a nation. We changed the world.
Around the special memorial garden, tiles etched with the names of every single miner who perished here. 100 years on, many relatives still live in the same community.
Very proud to think that they're thinking of them. And they really are thinking of them. I mean, they gave their lives to me.
For a community that has been scarred by such an experience, and the scars have come down through the generations, a place to remember helps that healing process.
Two miners, one being helped to safety, a lamp lighting a path to the future, is how sculptor Les Johnson has described his £120,000 statue, a commission he's immensely proud of.
What I've tried to achieve or represent in this statue is the mining community of Wales and the village community of Senghenydd, and how they have always pulled together in adversity, in good times and bad.
Erin and Katie, two pupils from the primary school which now stands on the site of the colliery, helped officially unveil the statue. In the classroom, the story of the children's great-grandfathers has brought history to life.
Loads of people have died and they weren't much older than us, and they're like the same age and all that.
We got a few children in year 6 that their great-grandfathers died in the disaster, and they talk a lot about it. You know, they've brought their lamps in, they've brought different things that their grandfathers have passed down.
The Aber Valley Male Voice Choir is just one of many local groups who've been raising money towards this centenary event. Now, in a time where pits no longer dominate our industrial landscape, there's a place ancestors of fallen Welsh miners can come and reflect on the sacrifices made for coal.
Well, tonight there are large crowds here all around me who are watching a reenactment of perhaps what might have happened here 100 years ago. The women folk of the village looking for their men. Remember, 439 men lost in the disaster 100 years ago this morning. Coal, of course, was massive business, not just here, but in many communities up and down Wales. And the men who owned the mines made a fortune, the men who worked underground a more modest income. But coal was huge business. It was often said that the pit ponies were worth more than the miners' lives themselves. One reporter who came up here 100 years ago said that in the days that followed, you could walk through the streets of this village, and in every other house, when you look through the windows, you would see a coffin in every other house on the table in the front room.
It's explosion, he says to me. Bill, it's explosion.
950 miners went down the pit that Monday morning, but 439 men and boys never returned. The accident at the mine was the worst ever in Britain, killing so many men that almost every home in the village lost someone. The explosion so intense it was heard 11 miles away in Cardiff.
Senghenydd used to attract a lot of miners because they paid a little bit more than elsewhere. And the coal was good, the conditions weren't perhaps as good, but people put up with them.
Hilary Barbook has lived here all her life. She lost both her grandfathers in the explosion. 2 families who lost a husband and a father, 2 families left wondering how they would survive. So how does a mother look after 8 children?
She took in washing, ironing, cleaned houses. She'd done anything that she could do to get some money in. When somebody loses somebody in the family, you always have people rally around to help you and, you know, put things right, but they were all in the same boat. Everybody had somebody lost, so they couldn't help one another. They just stood together and just held on, I suppose.
Hilary's paternal grandfather was never found, like many miners whose bodies were never recovered. There were 2 shafts at the mine. It's thought that the first explosion was caused when a spark from a miner's lamp ignited methane gas. That explosion caused a chain reaction, blasting a miner's cage up the Lancaster shaft, killing a miner at the top. Those who did not die in the explosion were killed by a lack of oxygen. The lucky ones managed to escape through the York shaft.
Say no system but they could actually walk through this gas to get out. So basically they're trapped in coal faces and roadways, and they die in the dozens or on the 1s and 2s.
Then the waiting began. Rescuers battled for days to recover the dead and the wounded. 1 man died during the rescue. The day after the explosion, 18 men were found alive, and they were to be the last. Horace Moss knows about the dangers of working underground. He spent 46 years down the pit. He lost his grandfather and 2 uncles on that day.
My grandfather, he was the head of the rescue party. And he was up and down the pit all the time, rescuing men. And then he heard that his son was still down the pit. So he said, well, I'm going down, and I'm going down to rescue him. And the gas hit the 2 of them. The 2 of them, they stand up dead.
This wasn't the first time there was an accident at this pit. In 1901, 81 miners died. After that, new rules were introduced to install ventilation fans to reverse the flow of air underground. They were never fitted here. After the accident, the manager was fined £24, and the following year, the owner, Lord Merthyr, he was fined £10. In today's money, that means each miner's life was worth 5.5 They came from all over the country to work in the mines, and many of the men who died that day are buried in this cemetery. Every grave tells its own tragedy, and this is the grave of 3 brothers, Richard, William and Robert Evans, aged 25, 22 and 19, the sons of John and Jane Evans from Blaenau Festiniog, 3 sons who died on one day in October. The first funeral was held 3 days after the accident. This newsreel footage shows how the whole community was affected. More than 1,500 dependents were left without a breadwinner. The tragedy 100 years ago today will never be forgotten in this community. This memorial, a poignant reminder and a fitting tribute to those men and boys who lost their lives to coal. Well, tonight there is a reenactment of perhaps what may have happened here 100 years ago with the help of music and theatre and children playing here a little later. Virtually everybody you talked to in this community was touched in some way by the tragedy that happened here 100 years ago. Lindsay Whittle is with me, and you lost great-grandfathers.
Yes, my great-grandfather was killed in the explosion. He was just 42 years of age. He left a wife and 11 children behind.
Do you know how they coped? I mean, this was before the days of social security and benefit. I mean, does your family know how they dealt with it?
Yes, we do. The records will show that my great-grandmother took in 7 lodgers in order to have some extra income. That's a lot of people in one small terraced valley house, isn't it?
And I wonder what effect it has on the following generation, because that kind of tragedy isn't simply erased in the experience of one generation. It must have touched them too.
Oh, we will never forget this colliery explosion in this valley. The committee have worked hard to put on this wonderful day, and out of tragedy there has to be some good, and today has been magnificent. We will never forget all those young men and boys who lost their lives for the price of coal. Never ever.
What do you think is the legacy of what happened here?
Well, clearly the labour and trade union movement, the National Union of Mine Workers was very strong in the valley, but those days are now gone. But we'll still be campaigning for justice in today's modern society as well. We owe it to the memory of those men and boys. We owe it.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll have much more from Senghenydd later in the programme, but first, the rest of the day's news. Back to Claire in the studio.
Jamie, thank you very much. Well, that's it from us here. For the final word tonight, let's return to Jamie, where a century on from Britain's worst mining disaster, Wales's National Mining Memorial has been unveiled. Jamie.
Claire, thank you very much and welcome back to Senghenydd. It's been the most extraordinary day here, one of high emotion, also one of commemoration, but also one of celebration of life going on after that terrible accident 100 years ago. The UK's worst ever mining accident. Around me now, you see the children of Nanta Park School who are parading by torchlight to round off the ceremony at the end of this extraordinary day. Roy Noble is with me now, who led the commemoration earlier on today. He taught here at the school that now occupies the site of the old colliery and played rugby in Senghenydd. It's worth making the point this is a national memorial, not just about the story of Senghenydd.
Yes, it is, because the 2 miners behind us on the plinth in fact signify that. There was another iconic one that possibly might have suited Senghenydd, but this is the national one. And if you go around the parkways, of course, you can see all the plaques denoting all the disasters that have happened in Wales, of 5 men or over.
And it's worth making the point that when we were here earlier on today, there were thousands, I mean, there are thousands of people here tonight, but yes, there were people lining the top of the valley.
Well, it was quite extraordinary. Up in the High Street, where they lost 35 men there, of course, there were people lining there in their hundreds. Then they were down the slope, on the roads, up here. It's quite extraordinary, the number of people who turned up.
It still strikes a chord all these years on.
It still strikes a chord, and in many ways, Senghenydd has rediscovered it, because, you know, the subject wasn't picked up, it wasn't mentioned in school, you only mentioned it on a project. But actually, now they've rediscovered their heritage.
Roy Noble, thank you very much indeed. There's much more on Senghenydd tonight at 10:35 here on BBC One Wales. But we leave you tonight with scenes from the children at Senghenydd celebrating the centenary of the UK's worst ever mining disaster.